Hey friends, welcome to the Primal Way podcast, where we talk about all things related to ourselves as primal beings, bringing back the connection to ourselves, to nature, and to one another, so that we can thrive in health, wellness, vitality, and strength, taking our place in nature. Hey friends, welcome. It's C. John Sawyer, your host, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Primal Way podcast. So, I want to talk to you today about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, and you probably already know what that is, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. And that is the joy and wonder of going barefoot. Yes, indeed. So many of you know I'm a huge barefoot advocate and barefoot ultramarathon runner. And I'm going to talk to you about the ins and outs of being barefoot, but I'm also going to talk about my journey with going barefoot, the highs and lows of having done so, things that I would change or do differently, if any. And, then I'm going to cover some potential tips and tricks that you can implement yourself if you're keen to start exploring being barefoot and having more of a barefoot life. I'm going to go over some of the things also that, the misnomers, the misinformation, the things that we're told but aren't necessarily true. So I want to cover all of that. I want to get as in-depth as I can here in the short amount of time that this podcast airs for. So starting with my journey, a little bit of a brief backstory here. I've been barefoot most of my life. It's very typical of growing up in Australia. I'm sure many people like Gen Xers, people my age, in their late 30s, early 40s now. I'm mid 40s now. They grew up in Australia. Remember going into, shopping malls without shoes or shirt as kids, tagging along with their parents, and no one said anything because it was just normal. It was the done thing. It was okay. It was acceptable to be barefoot in a shopping mall in Australia back in those days. And it was really a very freeing thing to be able to do that, to hop out of the car and just walk across the parking lot in through the doors, and then to be in the mall and not have to worry about somebody saying, hey, where's your shoes, where's your shirt? Because we had this kind of like beach life culture, and it was just the way that we grew up, So I've been barefoot all of my life in that respect. And when I arrived in America, one of the things that stood out to me the most prominently was businesses everywhere. No shoes, no shirt, no service. And that was a little bit of a shock to me, although not all that much, because, even though we grew up without shoes and shirts in Australia, where I grew up anyway, as I got older, it was something that you just started doing. You started putting shoes on your feet. You started becoming self-conscious about that kind of thing. Started getting more, it's socially acceptable to have shoes on, so you would have shoes on. You started caring about what other people thought, and so that became a factor. It's not a factor anymore. I don't give a shit what other people think about me, but back then it started becoming a factor, and that influenced what happened with my feet and my footwear. Now, outside of my weekends or that sort of thing, I went to a very strict boys' college when I was at school. So we had to wear these leather shoes, and there was always like these black leather shoes. There was always the fitting process. Each new year you'd go to the shoe store with your mom, and you'd sit there trying on these shoes, and they'd feel uncomfortable as hell, and the sales staff would be like, yeah, but it's leather, so it's going to soften up and you're going to get used to it. And I mean, they weren't necessarily wrong, but you would spend months in discomfort, coming home with blisters on the back of your feet and all kinds of, your feet all numb and cramped up from being in these horribly shaped shoes that were just not designed really for your feet. Your feet were designed to go into the shoe, not the other way around. The shoe wasn't built to be accommodating of the human foot. Now, with my journey in running, the evolution of that, I kind of went into this idea of running had to be done in running shoes. It's what I was always taught. It was what I had always seen. Every runner I'd ever seen was wearing shoes. When I grew up, I was watching these runners, whether they were Olympic runners or, my passion, trail running and running cross country and all that sort of thing. Everyone was wearing shoes. So as I got older and I started really getting into running, one of the things that I did was I looked for the best running shoe on the market, was trail running shoe. I wanted a shoe that was capable of holding its own on the trail. So I very quickly got into Salomon, and I was wearing, the latest Salomon S-Lab trail shoes. Their experimental shoe that was designed for their factory team, and they were great. Super expensive shoes back then, but I absolutely loved having them on, although I was still getting blisters, funnily enough. I wouldn't tell anybody that, but it was happening. My feet were still uncomfortable. My feet would still sweat. My feet would still get wet in river crossings, and then it would take forever for my socks to dry. And, there was multiple sock changes on ultra marathons, and it was a pain in the butt, to be honest. When I look back, it was a real pain in the butt. So one of the things that I started doing was I started planning for this massive cross desert running that I was this expedition run that I was going to do. It was across the Tanami Desert. Now the Tanami Desert stretched from Halls Creek in northwestern Australia all the way down to Alice Springs. It was just like 1,055 kilometers of desert trail, and a lot of it was hard red rock with bull dust over the top of it, and it wasn't super pleasant environment to be barefoot in. So I was doing that in my shoes. And that attempt really burned me out. I put a good 12 months into training and preparation and bringing that run online. And ultimately, we went out there, I did the run, as much of it as I could. And then we came back, and I didn't run again for, probably 7 years after that. But there's somewhere in the middle of that period, I decided to go out just to get out of the house. I was sitting there and I was frustrated with something and I needed to get out. So I didn't put on shoes. I didn't put on a shirt, just with my board shorts on, straight out the front door, started walking, and then I started running. And I started noticing something. I started noticing how free I felt. There was kind of like this. The only term I can use is the one that I've latched onto with everything I'm doing, and that's primal. I felt this primal energy flowing through me. I felt connected. I felt like an animal. I felt like some kind of a beast. I was running on the earth, but I was part of the earth. I was with the earth, and I just fell in love with the feeling straight away. And even though I didn't go back to competitive running for 7 years after that desert attempt, I would go out for short little runs around my neighborhood barefoot. I'd go as far as I could. And I didn't know anything about, gait, or how I had to shorten my stride. I had to, change the way that my foot was striking. All of that. I didn't know anything about that. I was just running. So I was still heel striking. I was doing it barefoot. And I probably caused myself more problems than I solved at that stage without any real guidance. So I started doing some reading and research, and I ended up coming across this book called Born to Run by a guy by the name of Christopher McDougall. And it's all about this tribe in northern Mexico, the Tarahumara or the Raramuri tribe. And they're a tribe of indigenous Mexicans who were, all about running phenomenal miles, but they were doing it in sandals. They were doing it bare, they were doing it minimalist. There was no mention of shoes, and these tribes people could just run for days and days non-stop. And falling in love with the concept of that, I decided to start looking for a pair of Huarache running sandals. So I came across this sandal brand called Tanner Sandals. I was still in Australia at this point, but Tanner Sandals was up on the northeast coast of America, somewhere I think it was Maine or New Hampshire or something, and he was custom making these amazing Huarache running sandals. So I ordered a pair, and they came across and they fit perfectly, and the strapping system was a little weird, not used to it, but I started getting out in these sandals, and I started noticing that to accommodate running in the sandals, I had to start changing the way that my foot was striking. So my footfall was getting shorter and shorter. My gait was getting really short, and my foot was starting to land more midfoot and then more toe striking. And I started feeling like my running got really smooth. I felt like I could run a lot further with a lot less injury. So I started competing again. I got back into trail racing and adventure racing and ultra marathon, started pushing my distances out again, and started feeling really good for doing it as much of it barefoot or in my sandals as I could. And that kind of became the way that I ended up being barefoot. It's kind of like my barefoot backstory. And there's some things that I would definitely do differently if I was going to do it again. I think first and foremost, I would research the way to actually run barefoot before I started running barefoot, because I did cause myself some problems by heel striking, just some impact related injuries. I caused some injuries to my Achilles, and my knees didn't feel so great. That stuff all rectified and went away once I started adjusting the way that I was striking, once I adjusted, my footfall. But it took its toll for the short term there for a while. So I definitely would make a point of ensuring that I knew how to do it properly if I was doing it again. And there's so much information out there these days. There's support groups on social media. Everybody is going barefoot these days, and it's so amazing to see. And I feel really good thinking about the fact that I was one of the pioneers of barefoot running in the modern day age. It's something that not very many people, even still, are doing. When we go out to ultra distances, it's still something that gets looked at with a great deal of shock and awe. You turn up to a race, a 100-mile race, a 50-mile race, and you've got no shoes on, people just kind of look at you like you're crazy, and then it's instantly a conversation starter. So at this stage, we are pioneering the barefoot movement and barefoot running. It's still not socially accepted in many respects to be barefoot in public. You're looked at like a second-class citizen. And I love that. Like I said at the start, I don't give a shit what people think of me. So I really love the look on people's faces when they look at me and see I'm barefoot in public, and the kind of almost half disguised or muffled disgust in their face. Like, I can't believe that you're grotty enough to be out in public without shoes on. To them, this is what I have to say, and if you're one of them, I'm going to throw this out there for you. And this is my argument for being barefoot everywhere, whether it's in a grocery store or at the mall or on the beach or on the trails. It makes no difference. Here's my argument. We go into these places with our hands touching all kinds of surfaces. You don't know who's had their fingers in their ass, up their nose, touching their kid's nose, blowing their kid's nose, getting their kid's snot all over their hands. You don't know where people's hands have been. Then they just kind of wipe them on a moist towelette and then grab the handle to open the door. You're then grabbing the handle to open the door. You have some other kid's snot fragments on your hand. Like, you get that, right? Your hands are fucking filthy. And so we don't have to wear gloves. We don't have to cover our hands to go into a store. Why do we have to cover our feet? The ground is not as dirty as we think it is, because we're so obsessed with being sanitary. Like, sure, you don't want to go into a public restroom that's got pee all over the floor and walk around barefoot on that with cuts on your feet. That's probably not super healthy for you. But then this is also something we've largely lost in this modern day and age. Discernment. Like, discern when it's applicable to be barefoot and when it's not. You don't want to go into a seedy public restroom with vomit on the floor and urine on the floor and walk through that barefoot and then go walk into the cafe next door. That's probably not something that you would do, right? But it's the same way as when you walk into a grocery store. You don't do it with your muddy work boots on. Like, it's discernment. You figure it out. Like, we're adults. We figure it out. We figure out what's appropriate. We figure out what's right, and we do it. And in many cases, we're just waiting for someone to tell us what that is. We've lost that discernment. So there it is. If you're going to go barefoot, don't walk into grotty, urine-infested places and then walk into a cafe. That's probably not going to help the movement any at all. But all of that aside, what have I gained from going barefoot in life? Well, a lot. So you know that everything I do with the Primal Way is all about connection. Connection to myself, connection with the natural world, connection with other people. That's what I'm aiming for, because it's something that we've largely lost, and I believe that that's the most powerful message I can facilitate, in this modern day and age. So connection to myself, connection to the earth, really powerful. Like I was mentioning, when I run barefoot, I feel like I'm a part of everything, not just like I'm a guy struggling to get through a course that somebody's put together, but like I'm a part of the course itself. I feel myself flowing over the earth, but I am with the earth. I'm one with it. The other thing that I've noticed is when I run barefoot, I don't have my energy draining as much. Now, there's different ways of looking at this. You could say that that is purely because when I'm using the rebound effect, the kinetic chain, I'm feeding energy back up through my system, I'm springboarding properly, I'm conserving my energy. You could say that's one aspect of it. If you want to go a little bit further off center than that, you could say it's because I'm grounding. It's because I'm a battery and the earth is a battery, and when I'm connected to that battery, it's putting charge back into me, kind of like Green Lantern and the lantern and the ring, like when he touches the ring to the lantern, it recharges the ring. Well, my body's the ring and the earth is the lantern. And when I touch it barefoot, it puts a charge back into me. I don't know if that's something that science will ever get on board with, but we all know what science stands for, right? So, that aside, I feel good when I run barefoot. I feel like I can go further on less effort. Maybe it's because my form is so much more, on point. Maybe it's because I'm not swinging shoes that are weighted on the end of each foot every single time and it's wearing me out more. Who knows? I don't know what the reason is. All I know is that it happens. It's a fact. The other thing that I notice is that my body itself is more aligned. Now, funnily enough, a really good mate of mine and I were out running the week before I did Long Haul 100 just recently, and we were running down this dusty trail, and he said to me, look at the difference in our foot strikes, and his feet were kind of splayed outwards from the foot pattern and mine were dead straight. So it's brought my entire kinetic chain into a perfect alignment. Now, the reason for that is because as you're running, if you don't have a perfect alignment in everything you do, you're going to risk injury. Now, you don't notice that injury when you've got 2 or 3 mils of foam and rubber and all that padding with shoes under your feet. You don't notice that. It might be happening, but you don't notice it. You don't feel it because you're getting shock absorbed. When you take away that layer of protection, you notice it. You feel it. If it's not on point, it's going to do you damage. So your body has to start adjusting. And that adjustment creates a perfect footfall, a perfect foot strike, a perfect gait, and everything comes into alignment. It feels really good. It feels really good to run like that. Right? So there's a couple of things. Now, my feet get hurt. Yes, they do. It's something I get asked all the time. Doesn't that hurt your feet? Do your feet get hurt? Yes, my feet get hurt. Every so often, if I'm running and I lose focus, because you need a lot of focus when running barefoot. If I lose focus and I'm running on a hard surface like pavement, if there's any undulation in the pavement at all, I can collect my big toe. It's my toe that hangs out further than the others, and it's happened multiple times. I'll collect the big toe and I'll tear the skin off it just under the nail, in between my nail and the pad, like right on the front of my big toe. At one point, I tore it badly enough that I literally tore it to the bone, and I had to just kind of push the skin back in place, and then I had to run back to my cars, probably a good 3 miles. I had to rinse it off, I had to wrap it up, I drove home, and then I took care of it, right? So yes, injuries happen. Yes, my feet get hurt. It's the same way as with running shoes, and you've been running on a rocky terrain. You come back and you've torn lugs off the tread of your running shoes. Well, the same thing will happen to your feet. Now, the point is that you kind of start adapting to the terrain with your ability. You don't go and run on a rocky desert terrain first time you go out barefoot. You start getting used to soft carpet, you start getting used to grass, you start getting used to sand, and then you start introducing harder and harder surfaces. Eventually you're going to build up enough of a pad on your feet that when you do hit those harder rocks, yes, you feel them, but they don't hurt that much, right? And there's a really big kind of transition that starts to happen here when you go consistently barefoot. You stop recognizing sharp things that your feet land on as pain. It doesn't feel like pain anymore. What it feels like is feedback. It feels like sensation. Like it feels like your body is letting you know what surface you're currently on, and you get this feedback through your foot. So it's not pain, it's sensation. There is a difference. Like it's a feeling. And once upon a time, with soft, tender feet, it would have been construed as pain. But now with the thick leather pads that I've got on my feet, it literally just feels like sensation. It's just a feedback. Yep, I'm on hard rocks right now. I've got to soften my stride a little bit. I've got to change the way my feet fall. I've got to change what's happening in my stride. And that creates a more adaptive mechanism. We're not just blundering on through any landscape with these thick shoes on our feet without any regard for where our foot falls. We have to take care. We have to plan. We have to scout ahead. And that keeps us more grounded in the moment. And I firmly believe that being grounded in the moment is also integral to the preservation of energy over longer miles. I used to go into a pain cave like everybody else. I would drift off and I would be, in fanciful places in my mind, ignoring the pain in my body and just floating through this race without really being grounded in the moment. When I started running barefoot over longer distances, that didn't get to happen anymore, because if it did, my feet would get hurt. Case in point, I was running a single track with some friends through Starkey Wilderness Park here in Central Florida, and it was a 16-mile trail, and the whole thing barefoot felt amazing underfoot. All kinds of terrain, we were getting through all kinds of stuff, and it felt amazing. And then in the last mile, I started thinking about coming back and having a cold water immersion when I got home, because it was a hot day, and I was thinking, I can't wait to get into my cold water tank when I get home. As soon as my mind wandered, bang, I collected a tree root that I didn't see, and it tore my pad. Like it took a big chunk out of my strike pad on my foot. And it was a lot of pain. It wasn't sensation, it was pain. It peeled my pad back because I collected the tree, like a little tiny exposed piece of tree root that was deeply bedded in at full foot force, as if I was landing on, like softer dirt. And it hurt bad. So I kind of stopped. I washed it off. I put my sandals on and I nursed it home back to the car as best I could. So the whole concept of your mind wandering when you're racing or running long distances, that doesn't get to happen anymore once you decide to go barefoot. The other thing I've really noticed is the health in my toes, right? So my toes are no longer all crammed up and misshapen. They don't overlap each other. They don't stick together. A bunion that I was starting to get on my right foot, courtesy of where my big toe was starting to curve in, has gone. Like I can still see the bump there, but it hasn't developed. My big toe is slowly coming back out, and that bump is all but gone now, right? So the health in my toes has really grown, and grown strongly, courtesy of getting out of shoes. Now my feet are the way that feet should be, capable of being on the earth barefoot on multiple terrains without it causing me any pain or hardship. So what I would recommend, and this is I'll cap it with this, I'll finish with this. The steps that I would recommend if you want to go barefoot. I would strongly recommend that if you've never been barefoot before, if it's not something that you've ever really considered but you're intrigued by it, start doing it just around your house. If you're a person that wears shoes when you're in your house, take your shoes off at home and just be barefoot. Be barefoot on your tiles, be barefoot on the harder floor, and just start to feel what that feels like. Go barefoot into your yard. Spend some time barefoot just walking around on the grass or on the earth around your house. Start feeling what the earth feels like. Get to the park and walk on the grass. Get to the beach and walk on the sand. Start feeling what it feels like to have your feet on the earth. Once you're at that point, then start experimenting with being barefoot longer. Go for a walk around the block barefoot. Like, we've been told our whole lives, if you go barefoot, you're going to get hookworm. If you go barefoot, you're going to get all kinds of horrible fungal viruses and diseases and this and that. It's not true. And I'll cover that in a future episode as to why it's actually not true. We'll talk about, germ versus terrain and all that exciting stuff. But in this episode, let me just reassure you that it is not true. You're not going to get infected with anything by going barefoot. Now, if you've got pre-existing conditions or a weakened immune system, please go and check with somebody who knows more than I do. Don't just take my word for it, right? Because I'm just some guy that you don't know. But the fact of the matter is, I have been barefoot my whole life, and I have never had anything go wrong in terms of getting infested or infected with something, right? Yes, my feet have gotten cut, my feet have gotten sore, my feet have been bruised, I've had puncture wounds in my feet, but it's never caused me any problems outside of the injury itself. So, having said that, around the block, go barefoot around the block. Allow yourself to experience feeling what it feels like to have harder surfaces under your feet. Now, another thing that you were probably told, there was never any concrete in our history. It's a relatively new thing. And our feet weren't made to be on hard, even surfaces. To that, I disagree as well. And the reason is because I have spent plenty of time out in the mesas where the Pueblo people, the cliff dwellers, around southern Colorado, these people are living on surfaces that are every bit as hard and uniform as concrete. They're walking barefoot on rocks in the desert that are just like big slabs of concrete. Right? So it's nonsense. Your feet are an adaptive tool. They are super adaptive, and they will adapt and blend and shape to whatever surface they're on. That's the power of your feet, right? That's the power of the human body. So that's nonsense. Get out, get onto harder surfaces. Now, if you're going to start running barefoot, this is my advice to you. You are going to need to adapt to it slowly. You go too far, too fast, you'll injure yourself. Not just your feet, you'll injure the entire kinetic chain. It will happen. Because you're probably used to having a lot of that impact absorbed by the rubber of your running shoes, the foam in your running shoes. So when you get rid of the shoes and you decide to start going barefoot, let the skin be an indicator, not the kinetic chain. And what I mean by that is, as you're running, the skin on your feet is going to start hurting. If the skin is hurting, it means that you're at the limits. You're as far as you can comfortably go without causing yourself injury. So stop, either put the shoes on or walk and head back to your house or the car or whatever, softer surface. As your feet, the skin on your feet starts to adapt, your kinetic chain is going to start adapting as well. You're going to get stronger ligaments, you're going to get stronger tendons, you're going to get stronger musculature, and your whole body is going to start adapting. So eventually you'll get to the point where you can run as far as you want, and the skin is going to be okay with it, and the kinetic chain is going to be okay with it because you did it right. Don't rush this. You've got your whole life to go through it. So it's not something that needs to be done in the next 10 minutes. That's how I'm going to leave this episode. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, hit me up. But otherwise, I hope you have an exciting day wherever you're at. I hope you're exploring your world. I hope you're feeling connected to nature. You've been listening to the Primal Way podcast. I'm C. John Sawyer, your host, otherwise known as the Earthborn Primalist. Have a beautiful day, friends, and I will see you for the next episode.